The bottle of amber whiskey sat on the rough-hewn table, untouched. For Jonas Miller, that was the first sign of a storm brewing inside him. He only refused to drink when the ghosts got too loud. The second sign was the sound that wasn't the wind. A frail, scraping knock at his door, so faint it was almost swallowed by the Arizona night. He opened it not to a person, but to a phantom. Huddled in the frame was a girl, shrouded in a threadbare sheet. Her feet bare and bleeding, her skin a canvas of bruises in the pale moonlight. Her hair was a tangled nest of gold, matted with blood at the temple. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, wide, green, and hollowed out. The eyes of a creature that had been hunted to the very edge of its will. Without a word, Jonas shrugged off his heavy wool coat, the gesture slow and deliberate so as not to spook her. He held it out. She stared at it, her mind seeming to process the concept of kindness as if it were a foreign language. Finally, her trembling fingers reached out and pulled the coarse fabric around her shoulders, swallowing her fragile frame. "I'm spoiled," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse or screaming. He couldn't tell. Jonas's jaw tightened. "Dirt washes off," he grunted, his voice like gravel. He stepped aside, and she shuffled past him into the single-room cabin, her gait unsteady. He pointed to a stool by the fire. "Sit." He busied himself heating a kettle, the silence between them heavier than any conversation. This was no simple runaway. The fine linen of the sheet, now torn and filthy, spoke of money. The specific, brutal nature of the bruises spoke of ownership, not a random bar fight. This was a man's property, and that man would be coming. He didn't know her name was Evelyn. He didn't know she'd been traded like a prize heifer to settle a gambling debt her father owed to the most powerful man in the territory, Silas Clay. All Jonas knew was the look in her eyes. It was a look he'd seen before, on battlefields and in burned-out homesteads. It was the look of something precious, shattered by a cruel hand. And on his land, that was a debt he couldn't ignore. As the first sliver of sun cut over the horizon, painting the desert in hues of fire, the dogs started up, not with their usual yapping, but with a low, guttural growl. Jonas picked up his old Winchester, the wood smooth against his palm, and stepped onto the porch. A single rider approached, kicking up a plume of dust. He reined in a powerful bay, a man built of solid muscle and arrogance, with a faded scar running from his eye to his jaw. "You lost something?" Jonas called out, his voice level. The man's eyes scanned the property, lingering on the cabin door. "I'm looking for something that belongs to my employer. A girl, young, blonde. You see her? You send her back to Silas Clay. There's paper on her. Legal." "The only thing I see," Jonas said, stepping down from the stone porch, "is a man who's confused a woman with a possession. I saw a scared child running through cactus and rock. You tell Mr. Clay that if he wants what's his, he best come with a sheriff and a better story." The rider's hand drifted toward his pistol. "You sure you want to make an enemy of Silas Clay, old man?" Jonas raised the Winchester a single inch, the click of the hammer a deafening sound in the morning quiet. "I'm sure I ain't moving." A tense silence stretched, broken only by the snort of the horse. The rider finally smirked, a cold, lifeless thing. "He'll be hearing about this." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, the promise hanging in the air like a bad smell. Back inside, Evelyn was standing, his coat draped over her like a robe of state. She'd heard every word. "He won't stop," she said, her voice steadier now. "I know," Jonas replied, not looking at her as he checked his rifle. "Men like him, their pride is their currency. You dent it, they have to collect." For days, a fragile quiet settled over the ranch. Evelyn kept to the shadows, a silent ghost in his home. She ate little, spoke less. Jonas left food out, mended fences, and watched the horizon. The unspoken question hung between them. Not if, but when. The breakthrough came on the third day. Jonas was wrestling a new post into the hard earth, his shirt soaked with sweat. He didn't hear her approach, but he felt her presence. He turned to find Evelyn standing there, holding a canteen. "Your water," she said, offering it. He took it, nodded his thanks. As he drank, he saw her looking at the pile of lumber, the tools scattered about. "Can I help?" she asked. He studied her for a long moment, seeing not a victim, but a person trying to find her way back to herself. He handed her a hammer. "Hold this. Steady now." Her hands, which had trembled so violently days before, were calm as she gripped the worn wooden handle. It was a small thing, holding a tool. But in the economy of a broken spirit, it was a fortune. She wasn't just being sheltered. She was participating. She was building. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun bled out behind the mountains. The sky was a cascade of violet and orange. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her gaze fixed on the dying light. "Why would you risk this? For a stranger?" Jonas was quiet for so long, she thought he hadn't heard her. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "The war taught me one thing," he said finally. "There's two kinds of people in this world. Those who break things and those who try to mend them. I got a powerful tired of the breaking." Evelyn absorbed this, wrapping the words around her like a second coat. For the first time since she'd arrived, the hard knot of fear in her chest loosened, just a little, and in that quiet moment, a bond was forged. Not of blood, but of shared defiance. But the peace was fragile, a temporary truce with the storm. Silas Clay was not a man to be denied. He was a man who owned judges and sheriffs, who believed the world was his to bend. And he was coming. If you want to stand beside Jonas and Evelyn when that storm finally breaks, to see what happens when a good man is pushed too far, then hit that subscribe button now. Don't miss the next part, because when a man like Clay returns, he doesn't come to talk. He comes to burn everything down. The storm arrived not with thunder, but with the sound of polished hooves on hard-packed dirt. 3 days after the rider's warning, they came. Silas Clay himself led the procession, flanked by his two primary enforcers, the scar-faced rider from before, and a hulking brute with a neck thicker than his head. Behind them, looking profoundly uncomfortable, rode Sheriff Mills, his badge glinting in the harsh noon sun. Jonas was waiting on the porch, his Winchester leaning against the wall within easy reach. He had spent the morning not in anxiety, but in preparation. Evelyn stood just inside the doorway, hidden in shadow, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment she had both feared and, in a strange way, anticipated, the end of running. Clay reined in his magnificent black stallion. He was a man of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, a spider in a silk vest. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over Jonas's humble homestead with open contempt. "Mr. Miller?" Clay began, his voice deceptively smooth. "It seems we have a misunderstanding. The sheriff here assures me you're a reasonable man." He gestured with a gloved hand. "That woman in your house is my wife. Legally, morally, I've come to take her home." Sheriff Mills cleared his throat, avoiding Jonas's gaze. "Now, Jonas, I've seen the papers. It's all in order. Best just let the lady come out, and we can avoid any unpleasantness." Jonas didn't move from his chair, his posture one of weary resolve. "You see a lady, Silas. I see a girl you beat half to death. Your paper don't mean a thing when it's signed in cowardice and sealed with fear." Clay's smile was a thin, cruel line. "Sentimentality, a weakness of lesser men. She is my property." "Funny?" Jonas mused, his voice low and steady. "I fought a whole war over that word. Property. Seems we didn't settle the matter after all." The scarred enforcer, Rafe, took a step forward. "You gonna listen to this old fool talk, or am I gonna drag her out?" That's when Evelyn stepped out. She didn't slink or cower. She walked into the sunlight, her head held high, still wrapped in Jonas's oversized coat. The sight of her, standing defiantly beside the old rancher, sent a visible ripple through Clay's composure. "I am not your wife, Silas," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "I am my father's debt, and I am paid in full." Clay's face flushed a mottled red. The mask of civility shattered. "You will get back on this horse, or I will drag you through this filth by your hair." Jonas rose to his feet. The movement was slow, deliberate, and carried more threat than a sudden lunge. He picked up his Winchester. "You touch her," he said, his eyes locking on Glaze, "and the last thing you'll see on this earth is this porch." The air crackled with the promise of violence. The brute went for his gun. He was fast, But Jonas was a man who had lived his life in the half-second between life and death. The Winchester spoke once, a sharp, definitive crack that echoed across the canyon. The brute stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, his pistol falling uselessly to the dirt. Jonas levered a new round into the chamber, the sound unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. The barrel was now leveled at Glay's chest. "The next one doesn't wing a hired gun," Jonas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It ends the man who gives the orders. Now, you and your boys are going to turn around and ride out. And if I ever see you on my land again, I will consider it an act of war. And Silas, I'm a veteran." For a long, terrifying moment, it seemed Glay would call the bluff. His eyes burned with pure, unadulterated hatred. First at Jonas, then at Evelyn. He saw not a woman, but a symbol of his own defiance. Finally, he spat into the dust at Jonas's feet. "This isn't over, Miller. That woman and everything she might carry is mine. You're a dead man. You just don't know it yet." He jerked his horse's reins savagely and rode off, his wounded man groaning in the saddle behind him. Sheriff Mills gave Jonas a look that was equal parts apology and warning before following. The confrontation was over, but the victory felt hollow. They had won the battle, but Glay's final words, "everything she might carry," hung in the air, a poison seed taking root. Weeks turned into a fragile peace. The immediate threat had receded, and in its place, a routine blossomed. Evelyn stopped being a guest and became a part of the ranch's rhythm. She learned to mend fences, not just with a hammer, but with an understanding of strain and pressure. She could cook a stew that didn't taste of mere survival, but of patience and care. She and Jonas spoke more, their conversations no longer just about threats, but about the land, the stars, the quiet regrets of the past. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Evelyn felt the first flutter. It was a sensation so faint, so alien, she initially dismissed it as a cramp or her imagination. But it came again, a soft fluttering ripple deep within her. Her blood ran cold. She remembered the weeks in Glay's house, the violation, the specific crushing weight of those nights. The timeline was undeniable. The faint nausea she'd attributed to stress, the fatigue. It all clicked into a horrifying, inescapable truth. She didn't speak of it for days, carrying the I secret like a live coal in her chest. It was Jonas who finally noticed her pallor, the way her hand would sometimes drift absently to her stomach. He found her one afternoon by the creek, staring into the flowing water as if it could wash away her reality. "It's getting colder," he said, sitting on a large rock beside her. "We'll need to lay in more wood." She didn't answer. The silence stretched, thick with the words she couldn't say. "Evelyn," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "A burden shared is a burden halved. It's an old saying, but it's true." Tears she didn't know she was holding back began to stream down her face, silent and hot. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Jonas," her voice broke. I'm with child." The words landed in the space between them, heavy and final. She waited for the revulsion, the anger, the inevitable withdrawal. This was the ultimate victory for Silas Glay, a permanent chain linking her to him, a ghost that would haunt this sanctuary forever. Jonas was quiet for a long time, watching the water flow over the stones. He picked up a flat, smooth rock and turned it over in his calloused hands. "I had a son once," he said, his voice distant. "His name was William. Fever took him and his mother when he was 3. I wasn't there. I was off, being a stubborn fool." Evelyn looked up, stunned. He had never spoken of his past. He met her gaze, his old eyes filled with a profound, weathered sorrow. "A child ain't its father, Evelyn. A child is a chance, a blank page. This baby, it ain't his, it's yours, and it's under my roof. That makes it mine to protect too." It wasn't forgiveness, for there was nothing to forgive. It was an adoption, a declaration. In that moment, he didn't just offer her shelter. He offered her child a name, a future, a defense against the legacy of its conception. Evelyn didn't just cry. She wept, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body, purging the poison of her shame and fear. And Jonas, The man who hadn't smiled in a decade simply sat beside her, a steady, solid presence against the current of her despair. In the shadow of the canyon, a new line had been drawn. It was no longer just about protecting Evelyn. It was about defending a future that hadn't even drawn its first breath. But Silas Clay's threat was not an empty one. He was a man who owned mines and men, and he would not be denied his heir. The peace was over. The real war for this family's future was about to begin. How far would a man like Clay go to claim what he believes is his? The answer will change everything. Don't miss the final chapter. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next part is where the ghosts of the past meet the fighters of the future. Winter came to the canyon, not with a blizzard, but with a slow, deep cold that settled into the bones of the land. Inside the cabin, however, a different kind of warmth was growing. Evelyn's pregnancy progressed, a quiet, swelling promise beneath the layers of wool and flannel. The child within her was no longer a ghost of the past, but a living reality of the future, their future. Jonas had carved a second rocking chair, and in the evenings they sat by the fire, the silence between them comfortable, a language of its own. But the world outside their sanctuary had not forgotten them. A different chill was spreading through the territory, the cold, calculated reach of Silas Clay. It did not arrive with guns blazing, but with paper and poison. It started with the taxman, who arrived with a newly revised and grossly inflated assessment of Jonas's land. Then the bank manager in town, who had once shared a friendly whiskey with Jonas, suddenly found his loan payments in arrears, citing pressure from new investors. The final straw was the legal summons, delivered by a nervous-looking deputy. It was a lawsuit filed by Silas Clay, claiming a boundary dispute over a strip of land that contained the ranch's only year-round spring. "He's not trying to kill us with a bullet," Jonas grunted, tossing the papers onto the table. "He's trying to strangle us with lawyer ink. He wants to make us desperate. He wants me to come to town, angry and armed." Evelyn, her hands resting on her rounded stomach, understood. "He's creating a narrative. The unstable old rancher, threatening a prominent businessman. He'll have the law on his side when he finally finishes it." Jonas met her eyes, a grim respect in his gaze. She saw the board now, not just the pieces. "So we don't play his game," he said. "We play ours." Their defiance took a different form. Jonas rode to the county seat, a 2-day journey, and spent his last coins not on a lawyer, but on filing a formal countersuit against Clay for harassment and trespass. It was a hopeless gesture legally, but it was a signal they would not be bullied into silence. Meanwhile, Evelyn, using the education her father had once prized, began meticulously documenting every interaction. Dates, times, witnesses. She wrote letters to the territorial governor. Long shots that she knew would likely be intercepted, but the act itself was a weapon. The standoff was a quiet, draining war of attrition. Clay's financial noose tightened. Supplies ran low. The winter grew harder. The end, when it came, was not in a courtroom, but on the icy trail leading down from the high pasture. Jonas was hauling a sled of precious firewood when the rotten rope, bought from a Clay-owned mercantile, snapped. The sled veered, pinning his leg against a granite outcrop. The sound of the bone breaking was a dry, sickening crack that echoed in the frozen air. He managed to drag himself back to the cabin, his face gray with pain, his leg dragging uselessly behind him. As Evelyn helped him into bed, her own body heavy and awkward, the full weight of their vulnerability crashed down upon them. They were trapped, isolated and broken, the perfect prey. 2 nights later, the dogs did not bark. They whined, then fell silent. Jonas knew what that meant. Someone they knew, or someone with a piece of their clothing, had approached. The door swung open without a knock. Silas Clay stood there, flanked by Rafe. He wore a fine fur coat, untouched by the cold. His eyes swept over the scene. Jonas, pale and propped in his bed, the rifle just out of reach. Evelyn, standing protectively between him and the door, her hands instinctively cradling her stomach. "It seems fortune has turned," Clay said, his voice slick with triumph. "A tragic accident. A frozen old man. A woman dead in childbirth. It's a story the territory will forget by spring." Rafe took a step forward, his intent clear. This was not a retrieval. It was an erasure. "Wait." Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. not with fear, but with a chilling authority. She looked not at Rafe, but directly at Glay. You think this is about owning me? It was never about me. It's about him. She gestured to her belly. Your heir. The son you can't have because the wife you had before me left you for a reason. Glay's smug mask faltered. It was his deepest, most secret shame. You can kill us, Evelyn continued, her voice steady as stone. But you will never hold him. I've written it all down. Every bruise, every threat, the reason for my father's death. It's with a lawyer in Santa Fe. If anything happens to us, that letter goes to the governor and every newspaper in the territory. You'll be a laughingstock, a pathetic, cruel man who had to murder the mother of his only child. You'll never be able to show your face in polite society again. Is your pride worth that? It was a magnificent bluff. There was no lawyer in Santa Fe, but she had played her one perfect card. His vanity. Glay's face contorted, a war raging behind his eyes. The brute force of Rafe against the devastating social ruin she promised. He saw the future she painted. Not a powerful dynasty, but a legacy of mockery and shame. You bitch, he whispered, the words dripping with venom. In that moment of his hesitation, Jonas moved. With a grunt of pure agony, he threw himself from the bed, not for the rifle, but for the fireplace poker. He landed hard on his broken leg, a cry of pain tearing from his lips, but his hand closed around the cold iron. He didn't get up. He just lay there, pointing the makeshift weapon at Glay, his eyes burning with a feral light. You got a choice, Silas, he gasped, blood trickling from where he'd bitten his lip. You can walk out that door and live as the rich man who lost. Or you can die on this dirty floor, a failure, next to a broken old man and the woman who outsmarted you. Your legacy, your choice. The standoff stretched, the only sound Jonas's ragged breathing. Glay looked from Evelyn's defiant face to Jonas's desperate one. He saw no fear, only a willingness to burn everything down around them. And he realized, with dawning horror, that he was the only one who had something left to lose. A profound, humiliated silence filled the cabin. Finally, Glay turned on his heel. This land is cursed, he spat, and walked out into the night. Rafe, confused and leaderless, followed. The tension did not break. It seeped out slowly, like air from a punctured lung. Evelyn rushed to Jonas's side, her hands fluttering over his broken body. He was shivering, sweat beading on his forehead, but a faint, grim smile touched his lips. You, he wheezed, are a hell of a negotiator. Weeks later, with the first thaw, a baby boy was born in the cabin by the light of the hearth. He had his mother's green eyes. They named him William, after the son Jonas had lost. The legal threats mysteriously vanished. The tax assessment was quietly corrected. Silas Glay sold his interests and left the territory, a broken man not by a bullet, but by a bluff, and the unbreakable will of those he sought to break. One spring evening, Jonas sat in his rocking chair, the new William asleep on his chest. Evelyn sat beside him, mending a shirt. The silence was no longer heavy with past regrets or future fears. It was filled with the simple, profound music of a home. Jonas looked down at the sleeping child, then out the open door at his land, green and reborn. It's enough, he said quietly. Evelyn looked up from her sewing, a true, untroubled smile gracing her face for the first time. It's everything. In the end, they won not by matching the world's violence, but by refusing to bow to it. They fought with the only weapons they had left, courage, cunning, and a love fierce enough to forge a new legacy from the ashes of a broken past. The strongest foundations are not built on gold or power, but on the quiet moments after the storm has passed, on the choice to mend instead of break. If this story of resilience found a home in your heart, then don't let the silence settle. Tap the like button if you believe in second chances. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of the human spirit, raw and unbroken. Because the wildest frontier isn't out there. It's the one within us all.